All right. So we're going to do this again. This is round 2. So I got a little test run before. This was actually good. So yeah, my name is Edmund Turbin. Here to talk about WordPress and reverse proxy, how you can integrate WordPress with enterprise websites. It's a topic that is actually pretty close to what I do on a day-to-day basis, and it's something that I can see in my day-to-day work. How companies are looking to take WordPress and then work with it as part of their enterprise solution. I'm a solutions engineer, and what that entails is that I will work with customers as they come onto WP Engine. I'll look at any integrations, any pain points that they have as far as migrating, moving their sites over, and understanding what they need before they come onto the platform. And a lot of that is also based around right-sizing them, so making sure that we're not putting somebody who is on really enterprise level onto a smaller plan where it's just going to fall over and not work for them. So try to make sure that they're successful as they get onto the platform. So my background is in development. I've been a front-end developer for over 10 years. I've worked with some brands such as Shape.com, mensfitness.com, Fit Pregnancy. I've also done more recently some work for Columbia University and really theming sites and taking them from a design to an actual working concept, a working site. So I want to start by sort of level setting, making it easier for us all to understand what reverse proxy is, because I can say when people came to me and started talking about reverse proxy, I just didn't understand. It sounds like too complicated and weird. So let's back it up to understand what a proxy actually is. So proxy is a middleman or a go-between. So somebody who does something, you make a request and the proxy does that. So I've got a proxy here in the audience. Got Ravis here, and so I'm going to ask to have some water. So may I have a cup of water?
Sure.
So my proxy goes, and he handles my request. Thank you. Thank you. Cheers. Okay. So when we talk about computer science, a proxy is starting with a forward proxy, right? So before we think about reverse, let's get what forward is. So again, it's an intermediary. It's associated with a client. So if you think of a web browser being your client, the client makes a request to the proxy, and then the proxy goes out to the internet and says, let me get that for you, come back, and it brings you that request. And in some cases, if it's got that request already, it will be cached. So in other words, if you have a request that's been made already, it doesn't need to go out to the internet to get that. So it doesn't need to go to the server and actually bring that request back to you. So you're saving there's some efficiencies to be gained because you're saving time in the processing of the page being generated or the request being generated, and you don't have to make the request if it's being cached. And this is what it would look like, a typical forward proxy. And I don't really know that this is too current that you would be using proxies in networks anymore. You've got your clients and the proxy in between going out to the internet and then bring those requests back. So let's talk about reverse proxy. So it is very similar in that it's a proxy that's associated to the server, not the client. So when I make a request, that proxy is aligned to the server. So it's basically saying, okay, I'm linked to this server, and I can get you a page from here. It does also give you some of the caching ability, so it will allow you to be more efficient because if that page has been requested, it will be cached. So you'll get the page from cache, and it'll be faster because, again, it doesn't have to be processed through the server and generated. So I've used Varnish here as an example of a caching reverse proxy. So Varnish is an HTTP accelerator meant to really speed up your pages, make it faster. We're actually not going to talk much more about caching because this talk is meant to explain how you would work with two separate systems. Caching is a part of it, but I think what we're really looking to explore more about is how do you direct the traffic to two different systems. So the goal, and what I see commonly here, is that most companies want to have an integration of some sort between two systems. They don't want it to look like it's two different systems to an end user. So they want to have the same domain and keep that the website, two different systems on a single website on the same domain. Some of the examples of this would be an application. So if you have, let's say that your company has built an application in Ruby on Rails. You've built the Rails app, your developers are experts in what they do in Rails. They also have a requirement for it to be a public-facing website and for there to be content and content creators to work on that site. So rather than build a website from scratch or a content management system from scratch, it makes sense to use something that's already available, so a content management system like WordPress. I've seen another couple of scenarios where reverse proxy is used in an interesting way. So in terms of a legacy system and replacing a legacy system with a new system, you can use reverse proxy to have some URLs go to the older system and then keep any new development on other URLs. So keep the new system where your future development is and then still keep around the legacy system if that's working. And another reason you might want to use reverse proxy is to separate systems. So you could have all of your content creators on one system, on one server, different network than your application. So let's say your application runs in a completely different data center. That would be possible to keep the users and developers separate and also keep the site on the same URL. All right, so that's great, but how does this relate to WordPress? Essentially, we want WordPress to handle the content part. We want WordPress to be the content management part, the blog part. We're looking for a seamless integration and really have a cohesive user experience and make it look to the users like there's not two systems. So most people don't go to a website and look and say, what system are they using? So it makes sense that you'd want to have it be seamless. The key requirement is that we want them to be on the same domain, and that's been common across most of the customers that I've seen. All right, enterprise WordPress. So it's really interesting. There's not a definition of enterprise and enterprise WordPress. So I think what we have to do is quantify what enterprise actually means and what it means to customers. So for the most part, scalability is a huge part of enterprise. High availability, the ability to handle concurrent users and scale is a huge requirement. Security is also a requirement. Keeping data secure behind a corporate network or a corporate site. Many enterprise customers will have integrations. They'll have a very complex system that needs to work with other systems. And that does make reverse proxy come into play. I think that's one of the reasons why you'll see reverse proxy come up, is because there are existing systems that work and they do their jobs, but they also have a need for content management. Multilingual support is also another reason why you'd want to use a system that is actually designed for that. And very often access control comes up. A company wants to use a single sign-on. They want to have their users in their directory authenticate against WordPress. They want it to be a seamless experience for their users as they log into WordPress. So the good news is that WordPress handles this really well, and all of these things WordPress is able to do. Some examples of WordPress in enterprise are larger brands like CNN, Time, AMD. AMD is a really interesting one. So they use WordPress as part of their solution for their Developer Central. Developer Central has 260,000 users on a monthly basis, and it's their developer portal. So it's where you go for documentation, for information about how to do things. It's a community based around their platform. So you don't have to be a big brand necessarily to be enterprise. And I think that the needs of high concurrency and high availability can apply to a lot of different sites. But I think the enterprise really refers to the complexity and the scale. So what are the benefits of using WordPress as part of your solution? So you guys know about the community here. So there's many people that are developers. There's many people involved in WordPress to support. So I think the community is a really big asset as far as finding people that can work on the platform, the availability of just bringing in new devs, and also just the learning curve for developers to start working with WordPress. It's a simple ramp up. No license costs. You don't have to pay. There's no licensing fee or annual fees, anything like that. If it doesn't work in WordPress, you can make it work. So you can integrate, you can create plugins, you can make your system work with WordPress. It's stable. It's actively maintained. You can see ongoing development, and it is active. Users find it easy to work with WordPress. I've seen other systems where users struggle from a content creation perspective, and I find that generally it's simpler for them to get into WordPress. They don't need to be trained as much as in other systems. It's intuitive enough where you can go in and you can figure things out. Challenges being support. Yeah, so if you've got WordPress, you've downloaded it, you've installed it, there's nobody there to really help you. So that's a big challenge for enterprise, but luckily there are other ways that you can have support, and managed hosting is one of those options where if you didn't want to deal with that side of it, you don't have to. So let the experts provide support. And that gives you that level of safety and accountability, so when something goes wrong, you know who to call, and that there's somebody there who can actually help you out. I think awareness in the enterprise market is also a potential challenge. I don't think that WordPress is as well known as some of the other solutions. I think it is growing, and I think there's a lot of companies that are trying to make it more visible to enterprise, and we'll definitely see that develop in the future. But there is a question. There is sometimes still a question of, well, is WordPress really enterprise? And I think we all know it is, but it just has to be a little bit more visible. All right, so I'm going to talk about the solutions that I see for reverse proxy. So for the most part, it comes in as a proxy pass from an external site. So actually my number 2 here. So an external site will take the traffic and then it will pass it over to WordPress. You can do it the other way, so traffic can come in through WordPress and then be passed to another site. And it really depends. It makes sense in some situations where, let's say, your WordPress has a lot of infrastructure behind it, and your application or secondary site doesn't have the same load balancing or firewall in front of it. You can also use CDN, which is one of my favorite solutions, and you can also use subdomains if subdomains are okay. Sometimes that's not really a viable part of the solution. So requirements for reverse proxy, this is what happens on the technical level. So you're doing this proxy pass. So you're saying, all right, traffic that goes to WordPress is on this URL, and all other traffic is on another URL. We want to make sure that the reverse proxy is you're blocking requests. So essentially making sure that no other servers can make a request to the reverse proxy. It only comes through the reverse proxy. And then on the WordPress install, you'll need to update your link so it appears that WordPress is in the proper directory. So let's say it's in a subdirectory. We want WordPress to think it's in /subdirectory. You can do that in the WP config or potentially write a plugin for that if you wanted to use it on multiple sites. So restricting access is done by a whitelist. And the whitelist does actually two things. So it says your IP or a range of IPs can access the reverse proxy. So it can access WordPress. There's that side of it, but it's also saying that nothing else can access. So you've got, you're limiting access, but you're also saying that it's allowed from these few locations or the single IP. A typical proxy pass, I've got two examples here. It's not difficult to understand what's going on in the configuration. So in your VCL file, you'd see a line like this. And it says, if location equals some site, then pass it to a different IP or a different URL. So it's really just being a traffic cop and saying, go over here. Nginx, very similar, so location is some site, then pass it to the other URL. In your WP config, it would look similar to this. You'd have a subfolder where you're defining that WordPress lives in the WP home constant and then the WP site URL constant. And then you also want to point your scripts and PHP to the right location. So this is the typical, the most common reverse proxy scenario that I see. And a user makes a request. A request goes from the cloud to the proxy. Let's say it's site.com. Site.com goes to the application. Site.com/app also goes to the application. But site.com/blog will go to WordPress. So in the reverse proxy, if it sees that it's /blog, then that traffic is sent to WordPress. It's sent back through the proxy and then back to you. So the interaction doesn't come directly from this WordPress install. It comes from your main site. So that proxy is really returning the WordPress site on behalf of the main site. This is the second scenario, using WordPress as the first part of the reverse proxy. And again, this is potentially there is load balancing going on and caching on the WordPress side that could be helpful for the application. So same situation, but we're just pointing, we're starting the other way, essentially. There are some simpler solutions which I like to recommend just based on the idea that you don't have to have an architect or do systems work to really make this happen. So if you're just looking to have another website pop up on the same domain, it may be easier to use something like a CDN. So you can also do this via subdomain. The good thing is that you're not going to pass anything through additional architecture. It's going to go straight through, let's say, your CDN and then to the proper sites. So that filtering happens outside of your system. And then if there is a time where things go wrong, it can be easier to troubleshoot. Reverse proxy, when there are issues, can be quite troublesome. So that is one thing to consider. When things go wrong, you have two places to really look at to understand where it's broken. Some of the content delivery networks that I would recommend are Fastly and Akamai. They allow you to set up a caching bucket or a caching group, which is essentially, let's say, certain pages go to one server and then others go to another one. So that works quite well. And of course, in a CDN, you may have the ability to do some caching, and actually keep the pages cached if they have static content, or they are quite cacheable. If they're not so dynamic, then the pages themselves could actually be cached. So the performance boost, and it actually handles that split without any additional infrastructure. And I think for me, that's one of my favorite solutions just because I think it's simpler, but it does require another vendor. So this is what it would look like if you're going to integrate with CDN. You've got your traffic coming in from the cloud, goes to the CDN, and the CDN actually just points the traffic to where it needs to go, and then it gets returned through the CDN. If you can swing it, subdomains are a really simple way to go. So you already have your domain registered. You can create a subdomain and point the subdomain to another site. So essentially, you're just saying blog.site.com goes to another install of WordPress, and then site.com goes to your other system. So quite simple. You'd have to enable domain masking in order to have the domain look like it's the same site. But it's a really simple and easy way to do reverse proxy. However, or in this case, I would call it the proxy split. However, most sites don't want subdomains. Some sites will, and that's okay, but it's sometimes a requirement that it has to be done without a subdomain. And this is essentially what it would look like from if you're doing it through your domain registrar. It would just you'd have your traffic goes in, and at the domain level, it's actually split out to the separate systems. All right. So what do we think could happen with the REST API? Is there room for this to be powered by the REST API? And I think there is. I think you could easily create a system where you're pulling in information from WordPress into your primary system. The advantage is you have a single system. You have a single system for theming, and everything is uniform as far as user experience goes. So that's my favorite solution. Oftentimes, reverse proxy comes into play when at the network level, though. So it's when development has been completed, and there's not really a timeline to do that. So it is something that I would recommend, but it rarely happens at the end of the process. You need to actually think about using the REST API as part of your development plan in the beginning. But I really look forward to seeing sites that are done this way. I feel like this is one of the best and cleanest solutions to implement two sites working on the same domain. So with that, any questions? Since I figured I'd put the enterprise up there, and I would allow Spock to do his thing. All right, guys. Thank you.